Well, good morning again, and great to see you. Thank you, choir. That was great. I know they're going to be back. But I got a great privilege to be able to share with you just for a few minutes this morning. And I've entitled my message, Connecting the Dots at Christmas. Do you remember when you were a kid and you would go out for dinner with your parents? I remember going to a few restaurants. We didn't go out a lot, but once in a while we did. And I remember as a kid that was always so very exciting. Sometimes we would go for lunch after church, and one of our favorite places, I don't think they exist anymore, but one of our favorite places was a little restaurant called Bonanza. Now, as a kid, a good restaurant was not defined by a Michelin star or a rave review by a friend. No, to me, a good restaurant was a restaurant that gave you activities to do while you were waiting for your meal. And maybe even after your meal, you got a toy. Now, often in these restaurants, they would give you a sheet of activities to do. And one of my favorites to do was the dot to dot. There's a couple reasons why I like the dot to dot. One, it was usually easy. It was a Sunday. I didn't want to be thinking about crossword things on a Sunday when school wasn't there. And two, because it was a bit of a surprise. Until you connected the dots, you were not quite sure what you were drawing. You knew you were drawing lines, but you didn't know to what end. You knew that there was a purpose to it. You knew all would be revealed in the end. And because of that, you kept drawing those seemingly random lines, connecting these seemingly random dots. And I think at times, life can feel a bit like that, as though our life is a dot to dot creating a picture. And some dots make sense. School, good job, maybe marriage. But then there are these random dots that show up and don't always make sense to us. And maybe as Christmas rolls around and you reflect on this last year, maybe you had some of those random dots show up in your life. Maybe a relationship fell apart. You had thought it was going to go the distance, but it didn't. And you ask the question, why? Why is this dot here in my life? It doesn't make sense. But we attempt to make sense out of it, don't we? Intuitively, we feel like there is purpose in this universe. And we say, well, I guess if that was not the right one, there must be someone better for me. Or maybe as you went through the year and your health took a hit and you found yourself in the hospital, the doctors spending more time than you had planned only to get a diagnosis that you did not want. And you ask the question, why? Why is this happening to me? And we try to make sense of what seems like a random dot that has come into our life. Or at work, you finally found a job you love and you're good at, and then downsizing hits. And you don't understand, and you say, why? Or your business did not come together like you hoped, and you don't know why. But it doesn't stop you from asking why. Whether we believe in God or not, we continue to ask the question, why? And we try with all of our might to bring some sort of purpose to it, some sort of good to it. We say things like, everything happens for a reason. Well, there must be something better for me, we say. Not even sure what that reason or thing could be. Many dots in our life make sense. The good ones. A healthy baby. A good marriage, a great job, peace in our family. But often there are these other dots that seem to shoot off to the other side of the page, and we ask why. If we really felt like there was no purpose in the universe and everything was random, we wouldn't ask the question why. Solomon wrote in his book in Ecclesiastes, he wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, he said this, he said, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And Solomon in this moment is saying that eternity has been placed in our heart, that we instinctively know that there is something bigger going on. And it says at the same time, well, we know the story is bigger than us, we are unable to see the beginning and the end in its fullness. Kind of like when you're a kid and you're connecting the dots as you wait for your chicken burger and fries. You start at one, and you go to the end. You see the beginning to the end and the full picture that it is making. But in life, we know there is a picture, that eternity is placed in our hearts, but we can't see the first dot or the last one. But we know there is a purpose. We know there is order in this universe. And so instinctively, we try to bring purpose to these dots, even when they don't always make sense. Richard Dawkins, who is known as probably one of the more famous atheists, and argues for an atheism around the world in his book, River Out of Eden, A Darwinian View of Life. He said this: some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Merry Christmas, everyone. As we reflect on that statement, we say, hold on, no justice? No purpose? No good? I see good in the world. No evil? Wait, there's evil all around. But if there's no God, then I'd have to agree with Richard. But I believe in a God. And so I see quite plainly good. I see evil. I see justice. And I see purpose. C.S. Lewis, who was a professor at Oxford University, had given up his Christian faith and belief in God after he had come back from World War I. After all the atrocities he experienced in the brutal war, he said, how can there be a God with all of that evil? And so C.S. Lewis set off to prove then that there was no God. But in his work, he could only come to the conclusion that that was not true. He said, how could I say that what I saw in the war was evil if there was no such thing as good? This is why when bad things happen to us, we work to make sense of it. We work to connect the dots because we know instinctively that this is not how it's supposed to be. This last year, I can tell you honestly, I have not had one person in my office trying to make sense of the fact that they are healthy, or that their career is wildly successful, or that their family is better than ever. These dots make perfect sense. But when all of a sudden in your life a dot seemingly comes out of nowhere, we ask how, why? One day a young girl was just going about her life, and all of her dots were connecting. She lived in a small village, and she would be getting married soon, just as was expected, until her little dot-to-dot picture kind of got thrown. And I want to read to you from the book of Luke in chapter 1 as we start to look just for a few minutes at the Christmas story. Starting in verse 26 of Luke chapter 1, it says, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. Mary, minding her own business, not a special girl by any stretch of the imagination. She's just living her best life in a small village in Nazareth. By her own admission, by the world's admission, there was nothing special about her. She was about as normal as they come. And here she's getting ready to get married. And an angel shows up. She was not expecting that dot to enter the picture. So far, most of the dots in her life made sense, and this one was throwing her a curveball. Verse 28, and he came to her and said, greetings, O favored one, the Lord is with you. But she was greatly troubled at the saying and tried to discern what sort of greeting this might be. As she hears this angel speaking to her and calling her highly favored, she's trying to make sense of this dot that has suddenly entered her picture. In verse 30, and the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. What? I found favor with God? What? I am not a prophet. I have not done any great exploits for God. I am a young girl in a small village trying to get ready for a wedding. That's all. I mean, imagine yourself just living your life, going to and from on the bus to work, back and forth every day, just living your life. So far, so good. And then all of a sudden, an angel shows up and tells you that you are highly favored. And I don't know about you, but I'd have a tough time just sort of accepting that. I think she does too. It says she was troubled. I'm sure she was. Verse 31, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. And of his kingdom there will be no end. They go, what? I would think slow that down. Just say that one more time. This is a big pillow. It's a big pill to swallow in this moment. The size of a pillow, probably. I was not planning this. I was not expecting this. And Mary asked this angel a question. It says in verse 34, and Mary said to the angel, how will this be since I am a virgin? This doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. I'm having a really hard time connecting the dots. The angel tells her how this is going to happen and then says, listen, Mary, in verse 37, listen, Mary, for nothing will be impossible with God. It doesn't matter, Mary, how crazy and random the dots in your life as you go along. God is going to connect them and bring something really beautiful out of it. Nothing is impossible for him. And what a great response from Mary. She says, I'm troubled. I don't fully understand this dot in my life. But verse 38 comes and she says, and Mary said, behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. She really has no idea of the picture that God is putting together. She has no idea what awaits her. She will face shame as the others in the village will either assume that she was unfaithful to Joseph or that her and Joseph defied the scripture and were intimate before they were married. Either way, their reputation would be tarnished. Now they head off to Bethlehem. They make a 150-kilometer trek, and that's a long way on foot. That's a few nights sleeping under the stars. And if you've ever carried a baby, I mean, imagine at 8.5 months going on a 150-kilometer hike and sleeping on the ground for a few days. They finally get to Bethlehem. There is no room for them, as we heard in the inn. And Mary's about to give birth, and she's sent to this manger out with the animals. God, what is going on? This dot does not make sense. This is your son. You want him born here? Like, what? But God is weaving together a picture. He's placing the dots and expecting Mary to follow. A long while later, King Herod gets word from the wise men of another king who had been born. And Herod doesn't want any threats to his throne, and so he orders all the baby boys under 2 to be killed. And so Joseph, Mary, and little Jesus are forced to flee as Herod unleashes evil, genocide. They flee to Egypt. God, what is going on? This dot doesn't make sense. We're running for our lives. I mean, surely for your son, you could have planned this better. But God is placing the dots, and he's saying, trust me. I mean, as we look at it from our vantage point, as we look through it, it makes perfect sense. But in the middle of it, it's really hard to see. And due to time restraints, I can't go into why all these make perfect sense. But if I would be very happy to share them with you after the service if you're interested. But now there were other things that took place, but 33 years into this journey, Mary will watch what no mother should ever have to watch. And that is the torture and murder of her own son. Why, God? Why this dog? It makes no sense. 3 days later, Jesus rises from the dead, and all of a sudden, these seemingly random dots start to come together. Kind of like when you start to see the picture of the dot to dot come together, and you're like, oh, I get what it's doing. In your life, you will face what seems to be random dots. You will face difficult dots. You will face dots in your life that seem to make no sense. But one of the things we learn from this Christmas story is that God is working his plan out according to the story that he is telling. And I believe that great faith is not a faith that moves God to accomplish what we want, but a great faith is a faith that moves us to trust God even when the dots don't make sense. As we remember the Christmas story and the angel coming to Mary in that moment, a dot that she struggled to understand, yet it was firmly in the purpose of God for the story that he is telling, or to stay with our analogy, the dots that he is connecting. And as the angel speaks to Mary, she ultimately responds, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." As you move into this Christmas season, as you carry along into the new year, things will happen that will be difficult at times. And you may ask the Lord, what is going on? Why me? Why this? Remember this moment. This first Christmas story. And remember that God is working his story together. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11, Paul writes, "In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will." In the New Living Translation, it says it this way. It says, "Furthermore, because we are united with Christ, we have received an inheritance from God. For he chose us in advance, and he makes everything, not half of the things, everything work out according to his plan." This Christmas, remember, great faith is not about getting God to make the dots connect how you want to draw your picture, but rather you have been invited into his plan. You have been invited into the picture that he is drawing, just like Mary was invited that night. And the Christmas story reveals that there definitely is a plan. And beyond what the Bible says, we sense it inside of us. As Ecclesiastes says, eternity is written on our hearts. We know there is something bigger going on. We know that things aren't just so random as Richard Dawkins would suggest. And so great faith is to trust that the dots you experience will be used to create the picture that God is putting together as a part of his plan and the picture that he is drawing. As you go and reflect on the Christmas story, remember that God will connect the dots for his plan. And when it feels like that is impossible, because sometimes it just feels like that's impossible, what are you going to do with this, God? Remember the words of the angel Gabriel, "For nothing is impossible with God."